Did you know that over 2,000 years ago, an emperor tried to erase history by burning almost all the books in his empire? This is the story of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China, and his infamous act of burning books and burying scholars. But was he just a tyrant trying to control thought, or was there a more complex reason behind this drastic measure? Let's uncover the truth together. To understand why this happened, we need to go back to a time before China was a single country. For centuries, the land was divided into several warring states, each with its own ruler, its own laws, and its own way of thinking. This was the Warring States period, a time of constant conflict, but also incredible intellectual growth. Thinkers like Confucius, Laozi, and many others founded different schools of thought, known as the 100 Schools of Thought. It was a golden age of philosophy, with scholars debating everything from how to govern a state to the meaning of life itself. Then, everything changed. The state of Qin, led by a ruthless and ambitious king named Ying Zhang, conquered all the other states one by one. In 221 BC, he declared himself Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, and created the first unified Chinese empire. His goal was monumental: to transform these diverse, warring peoples into a single, cohesive nation that would last for 10,000 generations. To achieve this, the emperor launched a series of radical reforms. He standardized everything. He created a single currency, a unified system of weights and measures, and even standardized the width of cart axles so all carts could travel on the same roads. Most importantly, he standardized the writing system, ensuring that everyone across the vast empire could communicate using the same characters. This was a crucial step in building a unified cultural identity. But there was a problem. The intellectuals and scholars of the time, especially those who followed Confucian ideals, were not happy. They were used to the old ways. They looked back fondly to the previous Zhou dynasty, which they saw as a golden age of virtue and decentralized rule. They would use ancient texts and historical records to criticize the emperor's new, centralized policies. Imagine the emperor trying to build a brand new highway system, and a group of influential scholars constantly holding up old maps, saying, "This isn't how the great kings of the past built roads. We should go back to the old dirt paths." These scholars weren't just having private discussions. They held positions in the government and taught in private schools. They would gather in public, quoting ancient poetry and historical texts to argue that the emperor's reforms were wrong. Their criticism was unjust academic. It was a direct challenge to the authority of the new government and a threat to the fragile unity of the empire. This brings us to the emperor's most trusted advisor, Li Si. Li Si was a firm believer in a philosophy called legalism. Unlike Confucianism, which emphasized morality and tradition, legalism argued that a strong state needed strict laws, absolute authority, and clear punishments and rewards. From Li Si's perspective, these dissenting scholars were actively undermining the state. In 213 BC, during a grand banquet at the imperial palace, the tension boiled over. A prominent scholar stood up and used historical records to criticize the emperor's system of governance, arguing for a return to the old ways. Li Si saw this as the final straw. He went to the emperor and presented a powerful argument. He said, "These scholars use the past to slander the present. They encourage people to disrespect your laws. If we don't stop this, your authority will crumble, and the empire will split apart again." Li Si's solution was shocking and extreme. He proposed that all historical records, except for those of the Qin state, be burned. He also called for the burning of philosophical texts from the 100 Schools of Thought, including the works of Confucius. The only books to be spared were those on practical subjects like medicine, agriculture, and divination. Anyone who discussed the forbidden books in public would be executed. Anyone who owned them and didn't turn them in within 30 days would be branded and sent to do forced labor. The emperor agreed. His primary goal was to secure his empire and forge a new, unified identity. He saw the old books and the scholars who revered them as obstacles to this grand project. By destroying these texts, he wasn't just trying to silence dissent. He was attempting a cultural reset. He wanted history to begin with him, with the Qin dynasty. He wanted to break the people's attachment to their old regional identities and make them citizens of one unified China, loyal only to the emperor and his laws. So, the Great Book Burning began. It was a devastating loss of cultural and intellectual heritage. Countless works of history, philosophy, and literature were turned to ash. But was it successful? In the short term, it did consolidate the emperor's power and silence his critics. However, the Qin dynasty itself was short-lived, collapsing just a few years after the emperor's death. The following dynasty, the Han, learned from the Qin's mistakes. While they maintained the unified empire that Qin Shi Huang had built, they revived Confucianism and made it the state ideology. Scholars worked tirelessly to recover and reconstruct the lost texts, often from memory or from hidden copies that had survived the burning. So, when we look back at why China's first emperor burned all the books, it wasn't simply an act of mindless tyranny. It was a calculated political move, a radical attempt to unify a nation and secure his legacy by erasing the past. He wanted to create a year zero for Chinese civilization. While his methods were brutal and led to an immeasurable cultural loss, the unified empire he forged and the standardized systems he created laid the foundation for the next 2,000 years of Chinese history. The story serves as a powerful lesson about the relationship between knowledge, power, and the complex, often ruthless, process of nation building. Thank you so much for watching. What do you think about this chapter of history? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into the past, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss our next video. See you next time.